Greetings, Jimmy. Happy to have you here via voice recording.
Hey Rick, thanks for having me on. Very glad to be here.
Before we move on, I want to give everybody a little background on Jimmy. Jimmy Michaels is one of the best known and most accomplished remixers on the internet. He has done remixes of songs by Earth, Wind and Fire, Billy Joel, Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, and many more. He's released 9 studio LPs via his record label JMP Music and Sound Preservation Records. Jimmy is also a music producer, songwriter, and audio engineer. Through his record companies, Jimmy has released more than 40 albums by various recording artists in a variety of genres from jazz, pop, indie rock, disco, and R&B. Jimmy, give me the story of your humble beginnings. Do you come from a musically inclined family? What spurred on your interest in music?
My father was a music fan, and I grew up listening to a lot of music with him. So, maybe that could be my start, listening to music with my father. And we had a lot of the same tastes in music when I was growing up as well. As for what actually spurred my interest in music, I really don't even know the answer to that, to be honest. It kind of seems like I was just born with it.
Who are some of your early musical influences?
I would definitely have to say Phil Collins being one of the top ones. He actually inspired me to learn to play the drums and become a drummer and the rhythm guy I ended up becoming later. I would watch him growing up. I was admired by his skill, his technique, and I loved his music, back when he was with Genesis. Not so much so when he kind of went soft. Other early musical influences, I would say Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Patrick Cowley, and Giorgio Moroder.
How did you get started? Were your first projects remixes or your own recording?
Well, it definitely wasn't remixing. That came much, much, much later. Where it technically started would have been in the mid-'80s when I was very young. Me and my neighbor, who was also my best friend throughout the decade and for many years after, we were messing around with about 3 boom boxes, or actually no, it was 4 boom boxes. We were recording different tracks on different cassettes of just, rhythmic stuff. He was making it with his guitar, like doing a little scratch up the neck of the guitar to kind of, like wicka 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 wick, kind of sound. I was doing rap beatboxing on another, and then I was rapping on the other tape. And then we played them all back at the same time and recorded them onto another boom box. And basically what we made was an old school rap tune, very amateuristic though. And it's the first time I'm ever telling this story publicly. People that know me do know this story. But yeah, thank God the tape's destroyed and it's never to be heard from again. That's all I gotta say, because it'd be good blackmail material. But that's really where it all started.
Let's talk about your early 90s garage band. I believe you had a hard rock group?
Yes, that is correct. Though it wasn't a rock group, it was technically a rock duo. And actually, this would be the real beginning to the last question you asked. Would have been with the duo, and we were called Waco. That's what we eventually called ourselves. We started out just doing rock covers, and it was me and my neighbor / best friend, same one that did that little rap experiment with some years before. And we were wanting to write original material. It just wasn't happening. I didn't think I had the skill to write music, and he wasn't coming up with anything. Then eventually, boom, here comes the inspiration to actually write something. And as they say, a lot of things come from emotional experiences and such. And that's exactly what happened for me to write Waco's first tune, pretty much, and the very first song I ever wrote. That song became Dark Lady. And that was Waco's song and the very first song I ever wrote.
You spent some time as a disc jockey. Tell us about that adventure. What types of records did you spin? Did you play any well-known venues?
The new technology of the internet, I started an online radio show called Disco Extravaganza that was originally hosted out of a peer-to-peer service called WinMX. And then that went down and it moved to a Yahoo group. But anyway, this show ended up going on for about 6-7 years, and I ended up getting thousands and thousands of listeners, and that's where I pinned the name DJ Jimmy M. And I would just I'd spin live, just like it was in a club playing the old disco, and that's primarily where most of my DJ time was actually spent, in my own home, broadcasting over the internet.
You are a record label owner. Let's talk about your company, JMP Music. When did you start this company? What gave you the idea to start it?
That was started at the end of 2007 officially. That's when I registered it as a business and opened up and everything else. And JMP Music was a label, a music publisher, all wrapped into one. And in the beginning of JMP, and for actually most of its history, to be honest, primarily it was all strict independent artists only, and the majority was in the indie goth rock genre. A lot of those indie goth rock artists did have other ties to their own publishing companies or what have you. We didn't take the publishing on everything. So when you would look at their albums, it might not necessarily say JMP Music. You would have to look and you'll see it's distributed by JMP Music, that kind of thing. And then probably it was towards the last few final years of JMP that I started to expand out a little more beyond that strict independent goth rock thing. Of course I had my own solo albums on there, which kind of broke the genre, as bizarre as they were. But no, the first step in that direction was I acquired the rights in the U.S. to Austrian composer Gerhard Heinz's back catalog. A lot of previously unreleased and sought-after stuff. And that's kind of what pushed JMP to a more extensive label in its last couple years. And, JMP had its ups and its downs throughout its entire history, but, for the most, it was pretty good. It kept an even keel. And what else did you ask? Oh, yeah. Where did I come up with the idea for it? Well, generally, I had the idea in 2003, to be honest, but I just didn't execute it for, a few years or so. But I wanted to give an outlet to independent music, independent artists, to be able to express themselves, record, and produce in the styles that they believe in, that they want, and not have any corporate suits telling them what to do or how to do it. So in a way, JMP Music was all about rebelling against the corporate major music industry.
JMP Music came to an end and you started Sound Preservation Records. Why the change? What makes Sound Preservation unique from JMP?
The difference between JMP Music and Sound Preservation Records? Well, actually, there's a very big difference. kind of a long drawn out story, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. At the beginning of 2015, the writing was kind of on the wall as to the future of JMP music. The independent music business was changing, the general music industry was changing, technology was changing. And with the onset of things like people being able to produce themselves in their homes with computer software and such, it was kind of pushing people like me off to the side, and there was no need for me anymore. Middle to end of 2017, a very good friend of mine, Dick Hieronymus, who any fans of Roger Corman biker films from the 70s or Don Jones films from the 70s already should know who he is, also known as Richard Hieronymus. He asked me to produce a Christmas-oriented jazz ballad he had written for jazz singer Trish Hatley. At first I was kind of on the fence about it because, I hadn't produced in, almost a year at that point. And, I didn't have an outlet to put it out since JMP was no longer existing. But, he made a suggestion to me that I should start a new label as a DBA rather than a company. And I thought about it, and that's when I came up with Sound Preservation Records. It was generally to give an outlet to put that Christmas single out on. But then I came up with a big concept that Sound Preservation Records is going to be way different than JMP. And what it will do is it will preserve the good old sounds, the good music from the old days that is either lost, rare, or never been heard before, and have the occasional new produced music that has that old school vibe.
For a while now, you've been known and well respected for your work as a remixer. What are some of your favorite remixes? Which are the most popular?
I'd say for the illegitimate stuff, probably my two favorites would be Carly Simon's You Belong to Me and Nicolette Larson's Lotta Love. For legitimate legal remixes I've done, I'd say my two favorites are Sassy Allen's Ask Me to Dance, which there's two remixes I did of that one that exist out there, and one that I'm not at liberty to say as of the time we're recording this interview because I've done it, but it's not yet released.
Tell me about your mixing techniques. How do you envision or make your ideas happen or come alive?
My mixing techniques. Well, that actually all depends on the genre of the tune and the function and purpose of the tune. For instance, like if I'm doing classic disco or funk, jazz funk, and it's intended to be an extended remix, aka a classic 12-inch mix style, I generally shoot for the classic Jim Burgess, Richie Rivera kind of style, which is where you really want to bang the living hell out of the kick drum and the snare drum as much as you can, so you can kind of feel it right in your face while concentrating on the bass and the main melody. So it really would pack a dance floor if you were to play it in a club or at a DJ gig where people are dancing and such. So that's one technique that I would do. Another one, say I'm mixing for an album and it's the same genre, then I'm going to want to put everything, even and, more friendly for like a radio or an album, and of course, no longer than say 4 or 5 minutes in length, unless the song has more to say beyond that, of course. As for how I make it come alive, if I know the song inside and out that I'm working with, I kind of just already have an idea in my head on what I could do to improve it, to make it better. Or if it's something I'm not completely familiar with, I will analyze every single aspect of the multi-track session. I'll listen to every instrument or vocal singled out. I'll try it, against just the drums or this or that, to kind of get familiar with what instrumentation sounds best, what should be more to the forefront, what should be more to the back. Whatever is going to create the best possible representation of that song.
Now, I'd like to talk about some of the music you produced. Back in 2011, you released an album named More Things Change. This album was a real treat. What was your goal in producing this album?
I wanted to pay homage to late 70s disco sounds mixed with a little bit of the early 80s new wave rock kind of sounds and just roll them all into one. That was the general idea and direction of More Things Change.
What is interesting about this album is that you had two guest vocalists that made their mark on the music scene during the 1970s. Peter Lemongello, who released a few well-received pop albums in the mid-1970s, and disco legend D.C. Leroux, whom I recently interviewed. Tell me about them. How did you come to work with each of these men?
Okay, Peter Lemongello. That's an actual interesting story. The collaboration that we did was actually unplanned. I never really intended on it. I had originally reached out to Peter with a business proposition, and that business proposition was to get the original multi-track master tapes for his classic album Love 76 and have me remix them completely, the entire album, and then reissue the remixed version on JMP Music. Peter loved the idea. However, there was one big problem. The master tapes went missing somewhere in the late 70s, and Peter believed them to have been stolen. I was joking with Peter. I was talking to him about the album and telling him how I really loved Can't Get Enough of You Girl, that was one of my favorite songs that he did on that album, and that I really wanted to do a number on that, remix-wise. So I made a joke and said, you know what? I said, I should produce my own version of that and have you sing it, and I'll just remix my own version. It was a joke, simple joke, but the joke ended up becoming a reality.
'Cause you know I can't get enough of you, girl. Yes, you know I can't get enough of you, girl. Lovers, lovers, we are lovers. More than friends.
Now, DC. Well, DC pretty much told the majority of the story when you interviewed him.
Reporting is that I became friendly with Jimmy Michaels in the process of having my Disco Juice radio show. I used to play all his edits. Wonderful man, very talented man. And he said to me, he just sent me an email, and he said, I have a track here. Would you like to play a lyric on it, write a song to it?
Basically, I was a fan of D.C. Leroux growing up. I had all of his records. He was one of my favorites in disco in terms of vocalists, lyricists. Really admired the man. So when I found out he had a radio show going on the internet and caught wind he was playing my, illegitimate remixes, I reached out to him and introduced myself and everything. And, we kind of, got a little bit of a buddyship going, I guess you could say. And at the time, he was working on a new song. It was his first song in several years with the legendary Ian Levine. The song was called Crash and Burn. And he offered me to remix it when it was finished. He wanted me to be a part of it. I got to say I was honored because, like I said, I was a big fan of his growing up. So that was an honor to me. So when it was completed, I did a remix on it. And we even did a music video. I produced one using, green screen stuff and, different effects and backdrops and everything. DC worked with me closely on it. That should still be out there if you want to look it up. It should be on YouTube, I believe. But, yeah, so that was cool, and we just kind of stayed in touch and stuff. And anytime I would do an illegal remix, I'd give it to him, for his show. And eventually, I thought about it, and I had this song that I had written. It was intended for another artist, but things happened, and it just didn't go through. So I ended up shelving the tune. It was a completely different melody, different concept, different lyrics, all that. The only thing that was the same were the instrumental tracks. So I sent DC the instrumental, and he kept saying that he's not going to record anything again and all that stuff. He explained it when you interviewed him. But he loved the instrumental, and I, asked him, pretty please, and he couldn't resist it. He did it, and there was more things change. And it's a really great song, it really is great, and, it's something that, it doesn't get old. It just doesn't get old. But unfortunately, it fell through the cracks, like DC explained in the interview, because, putting it out on JMP Music, independent label that has nothing to do with dance music, no wonder. But, the surprising thing was we thought it was a bomb. And then DC contacted me late last year and told me that he found out that it was popular. People loved it, and they were actually playing it in some clubs. And it was like, oh, wow, So it kind of started rethinking things, and was actually in touch with DC quite recently about it again. And, eventually I think, we're going to try to do something with it again. Because, it's old, it's a decade old, but, it still stands up. It never gets old, so... yeah, we're going to see what we can do probably a little later on.
I say I'm never gonna do it. I'm never ever gonna fall in love again. But then I turn around and do it, forgetting everything I've said and all the promises I've made, and doing something else instead. The more things change. The more things change. Yeah, the more things change. They stay the same. They stay the same.
One of my favorite albums is the 2016 album you produced for John A. Seri called Human Spectrum. Everything about this album is great, from the album cover to the diverse range of music. There's a little bit of everything: pop, rock, electronic, new wave, disco, and even country. Tell me about this great album.
Human Spectrum. That's not one I hear about every day. Gotta admit, so you kind of took me off guard there. But very glad you like the album, and I'm sure John would appreciate that also. What can I say about it? His daughter got me the job on that to produce it. And like you mentioned, it's very diverse. It's got a whole ton of different styles. It was a very experimental album. Mostly all the sounds on the album are all done with late 80s electronics, which was a very avant-garde kind of thing. And the cover art, you said you love the cover art. That was actually designed by John himself. John did his own cover art. Very, very multi-talented gentleman. He's a classically trained pianist. He's great with graphics, and he's an entrepreneur as well. I believe today he owns a business. I believe it's an eyeglass business or something. I don't know. I haven't had any touch with John since around the completion of Human Spectrum. Now, as for the album itself, musically, I can say in my own career related to me in music, on this album was in fact the final vocal I ever sang or recorded was on here, and it was the song Eye of the Mind. And another interesting thing about that tune, Eye of the Mind, is that it was originally written as a Waco tune back in 1996. It was never recorded. There was only a very rough demo done of it, and it was intended to be a hard rock tune, obviously, being with the the Waco duo, the garage rock thing, But when we were doing Human Spectrum, John presented me with this kind of gothic piano piece that he composed, and this is also one of the only tunes on the album that is not the late '80s electronics. But when I heard this gothic piano piece of his, I was almost floored because I was like, "My God, that's Eye of the Mind!" It was the same chords and everything. You could sing the lyric in the same melody I wrote and everything. You just sing it in a different style, of course. And it just goes to show you that a lot of composers think alike and they use the same chords. Nobody knew Eye of the Mind except for myself and Chris Petro, the other half of Waco. So, there you go, high coincidence. But I couldn't resist, so I told John about this, what it sounded like, and suggested, we do it. And, he loved the idea.
Night is very long, very dark and cold. There you are alone, sitting in a hole, and the world keeps spinning round. The eye of the mind is what you found. Can't come out, you're in too deep. Don't fall into eternal sleep. And the world keeps spinning round. The eye of the mind is beyond the ground.
All around, in terms of the entire production as a whole, got to say, John was great to work with, and, it was a fun little gig.
Recently, you've changed your style, and you've done a few jazz-tinged, easy-listening instrumental albums. Why such a major change in direction?
Well, I wouldn't exactly call it a major change in direction because I consider myself to be all over the map. I could do anything. And, I really always have. And also, as a matter of fact, all of the music that you're referring to on these albums, which were easy listening instrumental arrangements of 70s and 80s pop hits, they were all recorded over a decade ago. And some of them are even older than the More Things Change album. The reason I never released these back when I did them was because at the time I was going pretty strong as an indie rock producer, and when you have that kind of client base, if they caught wind that I was doing something like this, I could have lost business. They thought I went off my rocker and wouldn't want to use me or hire me anymore. So it's all about playing the game. But what fueled me to finally release this stuff was in 2015, I decided to try an experiment, and I took a handful of songs of my own that I had done throughout my 3 solo albums, and I either remixed or reproduced them into easy listening instrumentals to see how they would come out, and I tested it by dropping it and promoting it to the growing revival of easy listening radio, like Muzak easy listening. That's generally what it was, or elevator music as some people pin it. And it went over really well. So then I waited about a year and a half or so. It was after JMP closed. I decided to pull out the real stuff, the arrangements I did, which were highly inspired by some of the easy listening people from the late 70s through late 80s, such as Lex Diazevedo, Nick Ingman. These were the people I was trying to follow in their footsteps to see if I could do it, on my own. And, I released that stuff, and that went over really well. I actually, I was getting airplay on some of the remaining easy listening stations in the United States. Even the internet radio, easy listening stations, a lot of those were picking them up and playing them. So, I figured this is a direction I should keep doing and just keep releasing this stuff until I've finally released every last drop, which I actually did recently. I found the last couple that I did that were complete, I mixed them and I put them out on an EP. So pretty much every last drop of all those easy listening instrumental arrangements I did, they've all been released now.
Tell me, Jimmy, what are you working on now? Any new projects?
I want to kind of backtrack to the end of last year. I ended up coming out of songwriting and producing retirement, so to speak. First thing in about 4 years. I teamed up with the legendary Philadelphia producer Bud Ross. If you're into Philly soul music and pop and rock, you should know Bud's name very well. And he had this demo from 1977 that was musically fully produced for the most, but lyrically it was not. So what I actually did was I wrote a completely new vocal melody to it and wrote a song to this demo. I changed the whole concept of the original idea that Bud had, which he was working on it with the late, great Joey Lattanzi at the time in '77. But the song I came up with was called Love Me Right, and we ended up giving it to disco legend Denise Montana, the daughter of Vincent Montana Jr. from the South Soul Orchestra, MFSB. On to what I'm currently working on at the moment. I'm actually working on a pretty detailed mix and sort of post-production project with Del Casher. And if you're not familiar with who Del Casher is, you should be, because he was the inventor of the wah-wah pedal. That's right. That little pedal for the guitar that made that funky sound that carried disco music, funk music, and even rock and roll from about the mid to late 60s all the way up even to almost present day, I believe. So Del Casher, the inventor of the wah-wah pedal, and he's done a lot more too. So if you're not familiar, look his name up. His whole entire history is out there. It's amazing. I would highly suggest maybe interviewing Del Casher sometime for your show, although that might be a 6-hour Rick Henry special, believe me. But what we're working on, I won't say exactly what it is, but I will say that it will very much appease all disco, funk, and jazz funk fans out there. And you'll find out what it is when it comes out. And that should be coming in the near future, I would believe, maybe in the next month or so. I did want to mention one more thing that I did recently, but this is more related to Sound Preservation Records than actual work, production or mix-wise. Sound Preservation Records just released a double album digital digital release compilation called Classic Hits from an Alternate Universe, Lost and Recovered Gems, 1965 to 1995. And it is all genres of music from those years, and the point of it is exactly what it says. About 98% of everything on here has never been released before, so you would have never heard it. And, a couple tunes here and there were released at one time, but you will not find them anywhere today.
Okay, Jimmy, you've got to know where we're at now. Yep, my signature question. Okay, Jimmy, brace yourself. So, Jimmy, if you could be a member of any television sitcom family, which would it be?
Oh, I knew this was coming. I know your show, Rick. I know how you do it. Okay, I actually have two answers to this question. First answer, if you would consider this a sitcom family, I would be one of the staff at WKRP in Cincinnati. Definitely, that would be me in a sitcom. Or, if you're looking for legitimate blood family, the other answer would be one of the bunkers on All in the Family. That would also be me in a sitcom.
Well, Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. As always, it was great talking with you.
Oh, no problem. Again, I appreciate the interest, and I do apologize for not being able to participate with video like everyone else. But hey, like I said, I'm the walking time warp. What can I say? But anyway, Rick, you be safe, you be good, and everybody listening or watching out there, be safe and be good as well. And be very careful during this COVID-19 insanity. And let's hope that the world can get back to normal soon.
See what you really